So I'm going to give you just a quick background on what I do at Fallline as a backdrop to the topic at hand here, because I'm not typically a food futurist. I'm a land investor and an investor in ag tech, and that has some bearing on food, and trends in food definitely affect the way we think about our business and how we deploy our capital. So what are we? We're a private equity fund that invests primarily in U.S. farmland. So we're in 8 different regions of the U.S. We grow predominantly commodity crops, but a wide variety of them, 15 or 20 different crops a year. In addition to that, we invest in ag technology companies. So we're a bit of a weird animal. Limited partners can't really figure us out because we're supposed to be a real asset company, but then we do these high-risk venture deals, and it doesn't compute. So it's not a good recipe for everybody, but because of my background and my partner's background, I'm a recovering venture capitalist from Lightspeed Venture Partners, and my partner, Clay Mitchell, is a 5th-generation farmer from Iowa. We come together and bring a little bit of a different perspective to making farmland more productive and leveraging a lot of technology to try to do that. Our core thesis relates to this graph right here. So what you see is a scatter plot of farmland value by yield, by productivity, and there's a relationship there, right? Higher yield farms are more valuable. And what we posit as a firm is that if we can make farms more valuable, we can make them yield more crop, we can make them more valuable. And that's what we've been executing on for the last 6 years. We manage about $325 million worth of capital. And our goal is to work with farmers to make their farms more productive, and we do that in a variety of ways. We can add irrigation to dryland farms, so we do very large capital improvement projects like that. We can improve drainage where drainage is an issue, and there's a lot of parts of the U.S. where that is a big problem. We can convert pasture into farmland where it's a higher and better use, and we can do that also in timber, where a lot of timber investment was made in the U.S., and the timber market hasn't been doing as well over the last several years, and so there's an opportunity to convert some timber to farmland and create a little bit of value there. And then we borrow technologies from other areas and apply them in the U.S. So this is a biodegradable plastic mulch that we source out of Ireland. So it's been used in the dairy industry there for probably over a decade now. And in northern climates where a season is short, by deploying this kind of biodegradable plastic mulch, you can increase the growing season by up to a month. So we've been doing that we're the first group to do that in the U.S., and we're doing that in places like northern Wisconsin and getting really big yield boosts. And then we're doing a lot of R&D. Every season we're deploying new technologies, and we're working specifically with the ag technology companies in our portfolio to deploy their technologies on our farm. So the whole thesis around investment in ag tech for us really boils down to, do we see synergy between what this tech company is doing and what we're doing on our land? And as you can see from, if you're familiar with any of these companies, a couple of them may jump out as sort of not like the others, and Impossible and Ripple are 2 of those. These are food companies, and so we're a farm company and we do ag tech related stuff. So why are we in the food business? Well, we're in it for a couple of reasons. First, for us, it's kind of eyes and ears with respect to trends in farmland and in production agriculture. So we want to know where consumer tastes are. At the end of the day, we're growing crops that are going into livestock feed. They're going directly to the food industry for human consumption. And by investing occasionally in food tech startups, we get a little bit of a view into the downstream. The other dimension, when I talked about increasing value of land by increasing crop yields, we've discovered as we've begun to scale and have sort of reached more and more area and speak for more and more total crop volume, there's another dimension that we can add value to our farms, and that is by moving from selling into the commodity food chain and actually going to end users and processors and food companies. And so where there are opportunities for us to work directly with food companies, we can often find premium value for our crops, which improves profitability of the farms and for our farmers. And it gives to the food company a reliable source of supply, reliable quality, transparency, a lot of things that are virtuous in the food value chain, and so we can create some win-win opportunities. So we partnered with Impossible Foods, which is doing a plant-based meat alternative. So they've got the Impossible Burger, and it's now in something like 2,500 different restaurants across the United States, and just now beginning to make it into international markets. And we helped them early on as they were looking at their ingredient supply chain and understanding where they can source crops that aren't necessarily conventionally grown, but can be grown with high productivity and low cost and supply into their burger ingredients. And then more recently, we invested in Ripple Foods. So they're doing this wonderfully branded concept, pea milk. Sounds awesome. Actually, we can modify it to yellow pea milk. Sounds even better, right? It is a dairy alternative based on the yellow pea. Their intellectual property really boils down to being able to extract protein from the yellow pea very efficiently and eliminating a lot of the sort of bad aftertastes. So they're off to the races in the US and in a variety of very large grocery chain retail outlets. And we got to know them because we supplied them with yellow peas. So we spent a lot of time with the CEO educating them on the supply chain for yellow peas and where they grow well and where they don't grow well, and the trade-offs between the growing regions and the benefits of actually sourcing directly versus buying out of more sort of commodity supply chains. And so we grew about 1 million pounds apiece from last year and plan to ramp that up over time. And so we saw some real synergy with them, and they raised a round of capital recently, and we participated in that, and just tightens the relationship between them and us and our farmers, and so that's been working very well. So we think about food all the time. We grow food. We think about where consumer tastes are changing, and as we think about where we're deploying capital from a land perspective, the obvious thing to do in the United States is to invest in corn and bean ground in Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, the core of the Corn Belt. That's where values have been the highest, and that's where you see the most competitive farmers. We don't know how long that's going to last, and we believe that sort of in those areas you've reached asymptotic yields. I mean, farmers are really good. Genetics have been optimized for these growing regions. We see a lot of opportunity outside of those growing regions, and we see a change in consumer behavior leading to a demand for different kinds of crops outside of the traditional corn and beans. And so we're spending a lot of time looking in Great Plains and other areas within the United States that can grow small grains, sometimes ancient grains, specialty grains, pulses, oil seeds, those sorts of things, sort of the things that are more associated with direct human consumption and healthier attributes. So what's informing those trends, so kind of transitioning to the topic at hand here, this is what's informing trends, right? Consumer tastes are changing. The millennial is becoming a real force in food marketing, and is driving a lot of behavior changes and consumer packaged good changes, food industry changes. So 75% of the workforce by 2030 is going to be made up of millennials. So those are people born between the 80s and 90s. So in a recent survey, 68% of millennials say that the mobile phone is the most important device that they own. It's not the laptop, it's not anything else, it's the mobile phone. 44% of them do the bulk of their product research on social media. And 58% of them make buying decisions based on free shipping. So this is not the food market of our parents. And then you look at that in the context of the food that we're producing today, and there's a little ratio here, 99.9% of calories consumed comes from 0.1% of the natural genetic diversity of plants. So the food industry is kind of screwed up. There is a lot of opportunity here for change, and I think what we see now is a consumer demanding change. So that, I think, informs a little bit of where opportunity lies ahead for us, alternatives to sort of the basic quick calories. While millennials are looking for convenience and they're eating out more often and they're snacking, there is a desire for transparency. They are willing to pay a premium for healthier ingredients. And all of those things, I think, inform how we as a group of entrepreneurs and capital need to think about how we grow. And just tremendous opportunities in healthy foods, natural foods, and in sustainability and food almost as medicine to a certain extent. So there's a lot of growth here. One of the things we'll talk about is alternative proteins, and in the context of New Zealand, is that something that does the New Zealand dairy industry need to fear yellow pea milk? Does it need to worry about the Impossible Burger? I don't think so. This is a growth opportunity across the board for products that consumers are demanding, and we've got a growing economy worldwide. So I think it's a proliferation of choice, and so I'm anxious to get into the meat of the discussion here, but just to leave you with one quick stat, right? So this is a pyramid chart of population in the United States, and you can look it up online to get New Zealand's view of this. But If we fast forward to 2050, what does the world look like? Well, I'm up there in the 75 to 79 category, and that's a pretty small tail that's leading out there, so I don't really matter in all of this. And even the Millennials and Gen Z, the one that came the decade after that, they don't really matter there. The target market in 2050 is, I mean, it's my kids, and my kids will be on the tail end of that, and they're 12 and 14 now. So we're talking about a world that we can't even really conceptualize now. I mean, I look at what my kids spend time doing. They don't watch TV. They watch YouTube. They watch really stupid shit on YouTube. But it's a different world, and they experience food in a different way from us. And I think about the things like the bologna sandwich I used to take to lunch, and like that's like heresy today, and that's all my kids know. So just thinking forward to what their kids are going to know of food, it's exciting, and I think it's good, and I think there's a lot of opportunity, and let's talk about it.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed, Eric. Have your pick of the seats, and I will welcome up our three panelists. A very big hand, please, for Leanne and Rosie and Todd. Thank you very much indeed. It's great to see you. Hello. Lovely to see you again. Well, hello. Good to see you. Just to refresh your memory, because there was a little bit of a gap there between introducing them and then appearing. So on my far right, Todd Muller, local MP for the National Party, and very importantly, sorry, that's an important job, but very importantly, National Party's spokesperson on climate. And next to Todd, Rosie Bosworth, as I said, New Zealander, Dr. Bosworth, based up in the other foggy bay. Well, it's not foggy all the time, is it? That's unfair about San Francisco.
In September, maybe.
And then next to Todd, Leanne Marsh from Beef and Lamb. And let me, when we've got time for a good chat, so questions, please use the app, and those of you on the webcast, please use the question function on the webcast page, because I'm keen to get lots of questions here. Can I pick up on something I think you said, so I'm just testing you first, is that given the great growth of demand for food, that this is becoming a choice of food and technology, and therefore, would you drawing a conclusion from that, there would still be a reasonable sized market for what we might call conventional food?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, if I look in our refrigerator today, we have Ripple, we have milk, we have soy. Each member of our family has a different preference, and we use them differently for different outputs, different recipes, things like that. So I don't see this as one substituting for another. One of the interesting things that Impossible Foods found in a lot of their market research was, they're targeting meat eaters. They're not targeting, vegans who were eating Boca burgers and now will transition to this. Their aim is to create a flavor profile that appeals to the meat eater, but they're not looking to replace the meat eater's burger. They're looking to extend it. And one of the interesting questions that they asked of meat eaters is, would you, all else equal, if there were no, ill health effects, would you eat more burgers? And the answer to that is yes. And so this gives an alternative that, I find enjoyable. It's not a substitute for a burger, but I enjoy eating it, and so I'll eat both. So I think it is a proliferation of choice, and they're just complementary, I think.
And so somebody who might say to themselves, oh, I've already had burgers 3 times this week, I probably won't have a 4th. They might say, whoa, I've had burgers 3 times this week, meat ones, but I might have a plant-based one.
Just to mix it up, yeah.
Oh, I'm trying to work on this 100% burger diet. It's kind of an interesting cross. But Rosie, what do you make of that proposition? Or do you no, I won't prejudge your answer. What do you reckon about that proposition? There's still going to be a substantial business out there for conventional foods as we know them today.
I think we probably just need to look at the timelines around that. If we're looking at it from, say, today to the next 5 to 10 years, then absolutely we're going to have this market of really premium, say, New Zealand products where our beef and lamb and our premium dairy products can withstand that. But if we say, look at what your children will want to be eating and their children's children, we need to start to look about how far these alternative proteins have come in that time, and if they are starting to match texture, taste, flavor profiles, and at a cost that is quite competitive, then where is our place when consumers are out in the world can also get some really high quality alternatives potentially produced on their back door when we think about lab-grown or agriculturally produced products that don't come with the ethical, the sustainability challenges or less sustainability challenges. They definitely don't come with any of the ethical baggage of even high-quality New Zealand livestock or pastorally raised animals do. And then when we think about the health benefits of these new products on the markets, what are the millennials' children, and even the millennial and their children, going to think about New Zealand's pastorally produced products? That involves slaughter. It's going to have to be more expensive so that New Zealand farmers get their premium. It still requires a ton of water, and there's those health impacts associated. And then we've had to fly it across the world. All the while, millennials have a raft of consumer options that are just as tasty, made on their own back doorstep, and don't involve the slaughter of an animal. So they're things we do need to think about. And I absolutely am not denying the fact that we produce amazing products. That's not my my stick with New Zealand. It's the fact that other products can come in, and it doesn't matter how amazing ours are, there could be a time and place where ours do start to become more and more irrelevant.
Thank you. And actually, Leanne, you're wonderfully placed between the two of them, in that Beef and Lamb has been having a big think about this with lots of expert advice, and were made public, about 4 or 5 weeks ago, some very good research trying to understand what all this means to beef and lamb, and you structured this around 4 scenarios. Do you want to briefly give us a sense of what sort of conclusions you came to as an organization with these big factors in play?
Yeah, sure. So for those of you who aren't aware, we did this big study looking at alternative proteins and trying to understand, what was hype, or what was the reality, at what rate were these products sort of coming onto the market, so that we could really get in front of these potential challenges, but also look at the opportunities that were here for us. I suppose for us, where we landed is really taking that consumer view. So I absolutely agree. I think it's all about choice. So I think it's great that there's new alternatives for people, and I think there's some really great benefits in some of these products. And we're seeing, flexitarianism, rising, and millennials are really driving that. It's not about saying I'm going to become a vegetarian, and having a plant-based diet doesn't necessarily mean you're going to become a vegetarian. It just means that you're making some other choices. So I guess we see for beef and lamb that there's still opportunity for us. What that probably means is, as Rosie said, it's on that more premium end, and making sure that we've got a really great product, and a great product is a great eating experience. It's got great nutrition. It's environmentally sound, all those things that we know that consumers are looking for. So we see that there's a big opportunity for us, and the other options that are out there we're considering as a sector. So we're just starting that conversation, but for a lot of farmers in our sector, it gave them a lot of confidence that actually, yes, there is a space for us out there.
And some wonderful technology, such as the Omega Lamb project in PGP, which is really taking on that work a lot about really coming up with really exquisite meat, which sort of strengthens that hand. And at the same time, as an organization, you've just committed last week to farms being carbon neutral by 2020. I was going to say 2025, but that sounds far too soon. It must be later than that.
2050.
It was 2050?
30. I'll
Yeah.
have to check.
No, but the time's important, but even more important, though, is the commitment and the understanding that that comes about through a very big rethink about the whole of all of the activities on farm to achieve that. And of course, sheep farmers in particular, rather than beef, have an opportunity there with forestry typically. But it's wonderful that they're thinking like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was just unveiled last week, so it's been a whirlwind couple weeks. But yeah, some really great work coming out of there. So something for us to be proud of, and it's all about working towards, better. So we know where we are today. We know there's some, great, achievements that we've made. And I think in terms of the Paris Agreement, we're already 19% below what the target that the government now has set for us, which is 11% below 1990 levels. So we're already at 19%. So there's more that we can be doing, and so that's what we're constantly looking for is, how we continually improve those forest management systems to. Yeah.
Yes, but not to be too cruel about that. You got there because the sheep population fell dramatically, because some of your best land was given over to, converted to dairying.
Yeah,
so it kind of swapped the problem.
Pointed to me.
Yes.
Yeah.
But also the efficiency gains as well.
Yeah.
So absolutely agree. Yes, but we're going to claim.
Sorry, I don't mean to give you a hard time. Now, Todd, you're in a really fascinating position here because a great career in the kiwifruit industry and then with Fonterra before going into politics. So you've got the horticultural background, the dairy industry background, and now you're at the heart of this in policy. So what's your take on all of these issues?
Well, I think if you start at that view around what the opportunity is for New Zealand in terms of agribusiness in 2050, I'm more optimistic than Rosie. I think when you look at a population that'll be pushing 10 billion, as Eric said, there will be definitely an opportunity for the high-end value add. And as we talked earlier today, what we all know in this room will change, though, is consumer expectation of how that product is produced. But we start, I believe, from a strong base, and we are going to have to evolve our production systems to be able to meet that consumer expectation. The quality of the product is without peer. What we are going to have to do in terms of New Zealand agribusiness over time is to evolve our production system to be more efficient still with respect to carbon emissions, and even more cognizant than we have already been with respect to both water quality impacts and access to water. In fact, I think two of the key currencies of success in the next 20, 30 years will be your capacity to tell a story that has good data to back it up with respect to carbon emissions and water quality. But I have every confidence that the New Zealand agribusiness sectors will continue to adapt and evolve successfully. In fact, the New Zealand economic story is one of adaptation and doing it effectively. And I have every confidence, and backed by the sort of people that are sitting in this room and the technologies that we've seen showcased today, that we can do it.
What would be some of the legislative frameworks, some of the regulatory frameworks that would help incentivize and drive that change? How are we going to make those changes most effectively?
Well, I know you desperately want me to get into detail around climate change. He can't help himself, Rod. This is an ongoing thing between the two of us.
Avoiding the term.
But look, I actually think, look, the regulations are important, and we will have a conversation in this country over the next few months, indeed, around what is appropriate with respect to incentivising or otherwise further change in the climate space. But I think the greatest incentive has always been and will always be the consumer. And the success of New Zealand agribusiness story is whenever you've had that gap, if you like, between the consumer and those who are producing a product on the land as tight and as short as possible, we do well. And I think the greater focus will still be amongst agribusiness being totally tuned to what the consumer wants. Of course, the regulation needs to underpin it. I'm not, denying the fact that government and legislation and regulation will play a part. But I think fundamentally that the primary driver of change in this country will be what our consumers expect of us in terms of our various agribusiness products.
What might be some of the ways that we can improve that connection between producer and consumer? Because that's still quite a gap across much of the primary sector.
Well, I disagree, actually. I think that is a myth that farmers in New Zealand are increasingly focused on, what fertiliser they need to put on the next day or where they need to move their flock to, and which paddock is next in terms of the rotation. You heard earlier, I think, a very powerful conversation from Zespri around how connected their growers are with their consumers and their proactive process going back 20 years now, bringing those same consumers and particularly retailers back to New Zealand to understand our end of the supply chain. That sort of activity occurs across our agribusiness. Of course, you'll be able to find a handful of farmers who perhaps aren't as connected as you would like, but I think that's been part of the New Zealand success story. We are far from our markets, being ignorant of what our consumers want is a perilous journey, and we've avoided that. So I disagree. I think our farmers, by and large, are very connected to consumer trends and very interested about what the implications are for their farm systems.
Yeah, and Leanne, what's your reading on that from a beef and lamb point of view?
So I think there are a lot of our farmers who definitely are connected into market. They're over in the UK, they're in the US, they're coming back, they're actually saying this is what we're seeing in retail stores, etc. They're very connected in. I think there's also a group where probably very disconnected. And then I think there's a big group in the middle which genuinely have an interest in the markets, and a lot of the work that we've been doing is trying to bring the consumer closer to farm here. But there's generally an appetite for, I want to make sure that what I'm doing on my farm is what someone wants at the end of the day, because I'm spending a lot of time and a lot of money, a lot of sweat and tears, and I want to make sure that there's a product out there that people want to buy, and that I'm proud of, that it's landing in people's fridges or cupboards or whatever it is. So.
One of the crucial, there's lots of crucial players in the value chain there, but one of the most crucial is the meat processors themselves. And they have been making progress in recent years in terms of procuring better on farm, but then being better plugged into markets. What are some of, but are those still exceptions rather than the rule across processing? Those processors or those parts of processing outfits that are really well connected between farm and market?
So again, I think there is huge appetite there. I've also come from Fonterra as well, so I think you see, for New Zealand, I can probably say, particularly dairy and sheep and beef, is that there is still a gap around what we do best, and that's generally in New Zealand, and we get product into market. And then I think there's still a huge learning curve around being marketing savvy in these markets and being really consumer focused. And I think the meat companies are realizing that just being great in New Zealand isn't enough, and there's more that we need to be doing from a market perspective. So again, the market development team within beef and lamb is, been created to basically bring the sector together and have much more of a market-facing place. So yeah, there's some companies that are doing it better than others, but I think there's a lot of conversation around how we work better collaboratively from a front end, working backwards to the farm rather than farm pushing out.
Yeah. Let's take the conversation out a few years and again, a rather more global view. And I've got a question here from Paul. Which plant proteins do you think will become the most popular in the next 5 to 10 years? Rosie, perhaps, is close to this.
What we see at the moment in terms of like the top plant proteins at the moment, we've got your stock standards, you've got your wheat, your soy, your potato, your rice, and right now we're seeing this huge proliferation of golden pea or yellow pea, depending on where it's grown in Canada or Europe. But and that's a very, very popular protein, and New Zealand Sunfed Meats uses it, but we're only starting to scratch the surface in terms of what plant proteins are starting to will have value in this new future. And we're starting to see other proteins, lupin, mycoprotein, or proteins made from fungus and yeast. They are all coming to the party pretty quickly at the moment. I'm a venture partner at Era VC, and there's a lot of proteins going on in fungi, yeast, and mushroom-based proteins. But I guess the point here is, if we're talking about the future farm of 2050, New Zealand, and we already started to digress back into talking about livestock farming. What about the future farm in New Zealand in a plant protein context, and what kind of crops can we be growing? And going, okay, well, we don't know exactly what crops can be grown just yet. There are so many. Hemp's a fantastic one as well. But what we can also be doing, if we don't quite know those answers, is we can be the leaders and being that plant library and understanding what new plants and what new local native crops can be used in these mixes, and understanding what plants are great for beverage versus meat production and extrusion, and really starting to see where these trends are going, because there is an absolute opportunity for us to be global food producers still, but play in that plant-based protein space. It's a massive opportunity, and one that we can't just sit back and watch because we think we produce beef and lamb pretty damn well. I mean, that would just be dire. And we already see mega trends. Plant-based protein and veganism have been named the mega trends of 2017, 2018. That's continuing. Plant-based protein or plant-based beverages have doubled since 2019. That's only going up. Dairy in many markets is plateauing or declining. So why don't we get on that new wagon instead of really trying to just make the existing, possibly sunset industry, a little bit better? Why don't we play in both? And we can absolutely, we've got huge provenance for horticulture and with everything that's going on and understanding about plants and those horticultural crops. We need to be playing in that space, particularly in R&D and bioactives and therapeutics and all sorts.
And we're just in the first chapter of plant-based protein, really. I mean, if you think about where the industrial ag complex has been focused, it's been focused on creating higher yield corn and soy to a certain extent. Soy's got a bit of a backlash from a protein perspective, and so people are looking at other alternatives. But the industry has not invested in R&D in optimizing for protein necessarily, and there's new tools available, not just gene editing, but gene editing is definitely one, but simply a different approach to breeding, leveraging software technologies, AI, machine learning, things to make breeding more predictive, and then finding the targets to enhance protein in existing crops that we know have some protein content, but optimizing that. And then it gets complex too, because you have to think about, well, where are you going to grow this? What are you going to grow in rotation with it? And so it's a complicated set of decisions to optimize on. At the end of the day, from a farmer's perspective, I've got an acre of ground that can grow this variety of different crops. How am I going to maximize my long-term economic potential there? It's going to be driven by what rotationally I can sustain on the ground, and what ultimately the market's willing to pay for these products. And then as the market is demanding more protein from plants, we are just at the first stages of being able to supply beyond soy, yellow pea, a handful of others. But if we're talking out in 2050, it's going to be a totally different world.
And just to add, so the Collar Foundation, he puts out a bunch of reports. One's called The Fair, which is Farm Animal Investment Risk and Return, and that's backed by a series of over 50 institutional and private equity investors to the tune of $2.4 trillion US, which is 16 times our GDP. So, and all of those investors have sent a clear message to food producers throughout the world, particularly in the United States and Europe, saying, we will not withstand animal production in the food system going forward. We encourage, promote, and push you forward, Heinz, Waddy's, Campbell's, whatever, to go and invest in and explore plant-based proteins. And we have $2.4 trillion at the ready, assets under management to help you do so. And so we can't ignore that. And so when we say that, yes, New Zealand can produce the best meat, let's think about all these other market forces that come into play that start to make that meat production model a little bit less competitive, because we're going to have to sell that at a huge premium to make money out of that.
There's some great sorry, I'm pausing here slightly because there's some great questions coming in. A very focused one about if there are crops that could be grown for protein, how is the added value in that if somebody was to do that in New Zealand? We can imagine what the value add is in meat and possibly dairy, but what is it in a crop? Then there is a lot of downstream processing from that.
Well, there's the U.S. doesn't have a monopoly on protein extraction. I mean, these things aren't, sometimes you use them in their raw form, but in the case of Ripple, they're doing an extraction process to get to a pea protein isolate that they then reconstitute depending on what their end product is. Again, we're in the beginning stages of optimizing around that. There's still a long way to go, and that's an area where technology can be developed and value can be added through the downstream processes. Once you've produced the crop, then getting it to the end market. Again, the U.S. doesn't have a monopoly on that, so that's an opportunity.
Yeah, but that's something available not to farmers, because that's downstream. I'm looking at, if you're a farmer here in New Zealand, where's the value for you?
Yeah, and so we need to think about, okay, well, look about genetics and all sorts of other aspects and the R&D that go behind crop and not the diversification, but how we can apply our plant science to go, okay, well, how can we breed crops that, say, are the next generation of yellow pea that actually produces a far higher protein content or a higher in what other essential amino acids or vitamins and minerals, and how can we harness technologies, particularly controlled environment farming technologies, which is indoor farming technologies, to understand how we can grow crops better, to understand the language behind plants, to see how we can develop IP using technology that can develop crops and seeds that thrive with very little water, that produce way more vitamin C. But we can start to understand that language of plants indoors and in controlled environment setting. And then we have a play there, so we can understand that, we can harness that information, so maybe say, look, we've figured out how to produce these types of proteins or these types of crops. So sort of all the way down the value chain. We can't just look at the farmer. We need the farmer to be integrating with plant and food or R&D behind that, and we need to the upstream. We need to be thinking about how we can extrude better or whatnot. So it's all along the value chain, and we see actually that's going on at MIT, the Open Ag Institute in Boston. Just by understanding the language of plants better indoors, they've been able to enhance the essential oil quality in their basil plants in all sorts, 10 or 5-fold. They've been able to really, really increase crop yields, and they're now starting to grow tobacco plants in there for pharmaceutical purposes and for vaccine trials and all sorts. So we can start to understand crops from a different perspective indoors, bioactives or whatnot.
Yeah, look, at the end of the day, New Zealand has areas of tremendous soil. It's got great water resources. These are things that are in wasting supply in the world. We're losing 1% a year of farmland simply because of bad farming practices leading to erosion, which makes farms unfarmable and irrecoverable. We're losing freshwater resources all over the world. Look at the situation in places like California with drought and waning water resources. So you've got fundamentally strong natural resources here, and you've got the benefit of technology coming on your side. So we are at the front end of a democratization of breeding technologies and things that were only affordable to the Monsantos and Syngenas and Cortivas of the world. Are now tools available to the rest of the market, and there are startups that are enabling this. So what we're going to see is the world revolved around breeding for the Corn Belt of the United States of America, and that is changing. And so there's an opportunity to optimize plants for the conditions of New Zealand. It's affordable to think about doing that now, and that creates different profitability and cash flow streams for farmers here.
And I think one of the real interesting issues that will then confront New Zealand as a society, and indeed the broader agribusiness production system, is the extent to which we are comfortable to be able to apply some of these new technologies to our system. Obviously we have quite a resistance and allergy towards GMO as part of our production system because of the provenance of the New Zealand food story, and I think that's going to be a real interesting test as to whether we believe that is our future and we will stay. In fact, Eric, when he talked in his presentation, talked about natural, healthy, GMO-free as being a key carve-out of high value. Is that where we're going to stay, or are we going to open our production system to some of these other technologies? You know, I have a view. I'm very much on the natural side of the spectrum, but it's, you know, I think it's a debate that we have to have as a country.
Rosie and Leanne, your sense of where New Zealand how New Zealand navigates through that bit of a dilemma there about technology. Sorry, I'm a great believer in technology, but how strongly we emphasize the natural food versus a higher new technology version of food.
Yeah, I think, as Todd said, I think it's a discussion for all of New Zealand. I think we need to understand the technologies and where they're going and, you know, what that might mean. Today, the majority of consumers in the Western world are anti-GM, right? So all the science in the world can prove they're safe. They've been around in the US food system for 20 years. But, you know, consumers, there's, you know, the claims for products that are being launched that say GMO-free in the US are just continuing to climb. So I think at the moment, consumer acceptance is not there. I think we'd be silly not to have an understanding of these technologies and where they're going and where the opportunities might be in future. For example, you know, GM grasses could help with emissions, so, you know, around the environment. So, you know, there are some solutions around those technologies, but I think it's a big conversation because, you know, for, you know, every trend, there's a counter trend, you know, so, you know, Rosie talks about, you know, beef and lamb being a sunset industry. But then if you think about the vilification of sugar recently, you know, consumers are no sugar, sugar-free diets. At the same time, you get the rise of decadent desserts and, you know, people going to extreme lengths to, you know, even in New Zealand, right, the Lewis Road Creamery milk. So, you know, to make it a judgment that everyone's gonna, you know, want one thing, I think, you know, we just have to kind of pick that apart for New Zealand and what that means for us and what role we want to play as a food system in the world. And it's not to say that we wouldn't look at those technologies. I think it's just, it's a bigger conversation.
I certainly think we've got an answer here for one of the questions is, will there still be farmers in 2050? I think the answer is yes, because the land's going to be important, but farmers will be doing some very different things with the land. I mean, that's certainly a message I'm always keen to get out there to farmers in New Zealand, that the land's going to be more valuable in many ways. Yeah.
As they were 50 years ago, you know, it's... that's been the story of New Zealand agribusiness, is our capacity to adapt and adapt with very little government support relative to every other production system in the world, which is something that sometimes gets lost around how efficient we are relative to our competitors. That doesn't mean that we stand still. It doesn't mean that we don't look at some of the trends that I think Rosie has eloquently articulated this afternoon. But we have, you know, we start from a very strong history of adaptation and evolution and being very profitable and successful as we do that. So, you know, the land will definitely still be there because, as Eric says, we have some natural competitive advantages and it's up to us to continue to make sure we deliver on those.
There's a large number of questions here that some of them are very specific about different parts of science and different concerns about where food technology is going. And I won't try offer any one of the questions, but there is the central issue here. There is clearly a great deal of anxiety, skepticism, outright fear amongst people, some people, about where these food technologies are taking us. So what's the way that, what are some of the ways that those fears can be best allayed? And does it simply come down to doing lots of science that's well communicated, or is there something far more complicated here, because this is about food, which is so intensely personal?
Wow. I think part of it's an education process, and it's sort of, the fears are symptomatic of the same kind of bullshit that's going on in our country right now around facts. Like, for God's sake, facts are facts. Let's have a scientifically based discussion and understand what the pros and cons are of these different technologies. I think there's a big lack of understanding of what the various technologies entail. and what the outputs are from the use of those technologies. Not all of the results that you're looking for need to come from these technologies. There are other ways around. You don't have to edit everything. You don't have to introduce traits for everything. There are ways to apply technology to get to outcomes that are desirable without using those if you're opposed to them. But let's have open communication about this. I mean, I think the big ag companies did themselves they did us all a huge disservice with the way they handled GMO from the start. It was geared toward farmers and toward farmer profitability, and they were asleep at the switch from the public marketing, the consumer marketing side of that debate, and they lost. They lost big, and now they're trying to think about how in this next iteration of technologies, how do we not screw that up again? And it's off to a tough start. I mean, it's a challenging topic around the world, and I think it comes down to having a more open discussion, a data-oriented discussion, and educating the public and giving people options. And we just seem completely incapable of doing that in the United States, and hopefully you guys will do a better job.
Look, I'm actually quite worried about this. I was struck by Ian Ferguson's comment earlier when he talked about the impact of transparency in a supply chain overlaid by the democratization of access to information. And then you reflect on some of Eric's comments about consumers going online to have their particular prejudices with respect to politics and consumer products echoed back to them. And their lack of appetite, to excuse the pun, for any alternative data-informed commentary that might actually be useful to reflect on. And I worry about that, actually, from a New Zealand perspective, because we have a story that we have told now for a number of decades around the values inherent in the New Zealand system. Now, we all know areas that we've still got to improve on as a country, but I think we are going to run up against that as all other food production systems are going to. And how you navigate that when you have, what was those figures that we saw with the previous presentation? How many billion devices that are going to be in the world in 2035, all telling a particular story that reflects the value set of the person looking at it? That is one heck of a complex system to navigate when you're a food producer.
Yeah, and I think someone earlier in the presentation had mentioned just about how public, calculate risk. And I think just further to that conversation is just, it's absolutes that people are looking for. They want to try and, eradicate cancer, so we'll try and eat, everything perfectly, and we'll try and find things that don't have any chemicals in it, and, that same person said, good luck, right? So I think it's a really interesting time to be in food because there's so much focus from the public around what's going into your body and how that's, helping or hindering a long life. So it's a really tricky time to navigate a lot of these new technologies, because I think technology, we all know, can be great, but there's also the other side where there's a lot of unknowns, and so it's not until we sort of get through them. But, I agree, I think there's looking at the market, not, making missteps around some of those things, and any decision, from our sector, we'll be evaluating all these things and probably a watch and see before sort of diving in and making, big decisions around, anything that we might be looking at changing.
Right. I'm going to end, sorry, Rosie, you wanted to...
No, go ahead.
Right, I need to end. So I was going to end on a whimsical personal note and let your, I haven't prepared for this question at all. So let your imagination run wild. It's the evening of May the 23rd, 2035. You are somewhere in the world. If you're a New Zealander, you might be slightly homesick. I'm looking forward to coming back. And your thoughts turn to, your cravings turn to a food product from New Zealand that you really want. What is it? It's May the 23rd, 2035.
Well, if I don't say a zespri kiwifruit, I'll never get out here alive.
Or, well, then will it be kiwifruit as we know it today, or will it have some extra beautifully grown attributes that one could never have imagined in 2018?
I'm sure it will have that, because that's the nature of that particular story. But I'm going to... My problem is that I'm a conservative, right? So I'm going to think back of things that are valuable to me. You asked the question around, it's 2035, and what's the food that is going to be evocative for you of home? So for me, it'll be apple crumble with vanilla ice cream, because that is evocative of home. I know that's not the answer you were wanting, but that's an honest answer. There we go.
Well, no, it's a terribly good answer, because that's the sort of engagement we'd be wanting to have with a select group of consumers around the world if they're not from New Zealand or not. You can be a virtual New Zealander, even if you weren't born, many of us weren't born here. So no, it's a perfectly good answer. And Rosie?
The first thing that came to mind was avocado, but I don't know if that will be in by 2050. What I do really miss about home when I'm not here is just kumara versus yam or sweet potato. I crave kumara, roasted kumara. So it'll probably just be a roasted kumara, but it's not exactly very futurist.
Kumara is good. We can conquer the world with kumara. Yeah, no, absolutely. Not many other people have kumara. That's great.
I'd like to know what that is.
Sweet potato.
Yeah, it's our version of sweet potato.
But it's a bit different to
let
the
me tell you,
American
it's
yam
very
and sweet
superior
potato.
to sweet potato in texture and flavour. It's hard to peel.
Well, I must find one this week then.
So, Leanne.
Oh, of course, it's lamb or beef. But it actually would be that, even if I wasn't working for the industry. But I work for the industry because I do enjoy those products. And I think, from a consumer perspective, you don't eat just for health. You don't eat just for, one reason. There's a whole bunch of reasons, right? So, it's the experience that you have and what those memories, evoke, and the whole, the wine that goes with it and everything like that. But yeah, a nice, beautiful piece of lamb.
But it would be lamb not as necessarily we know it today. It would be enhanced lamb. It would be...
It'll probably be the best lamb in the whole entire world.
From a carbon-neutral farm.
Exactly.
How about Eric? By now you've become a New Zealand citizen because you love the place. You've invested,
I've got the
you've
perfect
invested
answer
so
for
much
this.
money here.
So just yesterday we were at the Plant and Food Research Center, and we had the opportunity to sample a wide variety of kiwi. And I've really only known one version, the green kind that we get near where I live. And there was a smooth-skinned kiwi that we sampled that was not commercially available yet. So I couldn't have it now, except for the fact that we were there. And that was the best kiwi I've ever had. And the breeder was complaining that it's not quite ready for prime time. I'm like, no, you need to sell this right now. So and now I'll tell you what it would not be, which was the other thing that we tried, which was the spicy kiwi. That literally nearly burned a hole in my esophagus.
Oh, wow.
That one, not so much. But the smooth-skinned kiwi, I'm a huge fan, so I'll come back in 2035
Can
to
you
enjoy
eat them
it
with the
commercially.
skin on?
Pardon?
Can you eat them with the skin on?
Yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah.
If I may chip in my 2 cents worth, it would be a feijoa.
Oh, yeah. I forgot that.
Yeah, feijoa ice cream. Anyway, enough of all this. I'm hungry. It's time for dinner. Look, a very big hand for our panelists, please, to Todd, to Rosie, to Leanne, and to Eric. Thank you very much indeed.